Do you think I need the shades?
I don't think you need the shades. No.
Remember, what was that lady's name? Gillian Bowler or something. Didn't she make them fashionable?
I don't know.
She owned a travel company.
Yes.
And she always wore shades on her head. Not that that's why they were, just forgot they were there.
Yes.
Actually hoping for a minute they were my actual glasses.
Right, okay.
No.
So you're all over things as normal, basically.
All over the place is normal.
Yes.
Is anything getting more controlled in your life at all?
No, definitely not.
Do you think it's everyone?
No, I don't think it's everyone at all. No, I see people I know doing like yoga and Pilates and, you know, posting inspirational quotes from on Instagram, and it doesn't look like the sort of life I'm living.
It's just
basically washing clothes and stuff like
I just feel like I'm lurching from day to day.
Yeah.
Literally. And, you know, we were talking there before we came on air about something in the middle of May.
Yeah.
Which feels like...
Yeah.
Could it maybe happen? Maybe not. Is May going to happen?
Yeah,
you know, it's so far away.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I always agree to these things. A month away, it could be dead, or it could be in Hollywood or something. Anything is possible.
Anything is possible.
A month, God.
Yeah, no, it is a long time.
I can plan a month ahead.
Anyway, it really annoys my friends that I won't commit to anything. I just go, contact me nearer the time, to anything, and then they get really irritated with me. So, maybe it's not everyone, but anyway, here we are, and we're going to have an organised discussion in the middle of our chaotic lives.
Yeah.
Rachel Redmond was found guilty recently for impeding a Garda investigation into the murder of a guy called Jordan Davis. But we wanted to sort of take a bit of a deep dive into this and the wider family around her. Who is Rachel Redmond, where she comes from, and a bit of background, which no doubt will be given at some of it, I imagine, at her sentence. Now, she denied these charges and was insistent during the court case and after that she had done nothing wrong, but the jury found her guilty. But we're just going to go all the way back to where Rachel Redmond came from. She's 34 years of age, and she's a sister of Robert Roo Redmond, who's serving life in prison. But she's also a sister of a guy called Jar Redmond, who's an inspirational character that came from the family. And I suppose it's interesting to see what went on in the family and the different roads some of them took. And obviously there are other members of the family, no involvement with crime and, you know, are doing their own thing. But it's unusual for a female to be caught up in a gangland murder, although the legislation around the gangland legislation, as we call it, does allow for charges that, you know, if you do anything in relation to it, like, for example, as she was accused of picking a killer up from a bus stop, bringing him to a hotel and checking in to that hotel under her own name. That was how she ended up in court. But these are kind of new enough, relatively speaking, charges that are being brought.
Yeah, I mean, the facts of the case weren't really in dispute in terms of Rachel Redmond collected Wayne Cooney. She was in a relationship with Wayne Cooney. He was her boyfriend. So, like, those facts weren't in dispute. And the fact that they went to the hotel, what she was disputing was her knowledge of what had gone on. He was after committing a murder, shooting dead Jordan Davis, who had been involved in the drug scene in Coolock and was out walking his child when he was shot dead. Wayne Cooney was the gunman, and obviously Rachel Redmond collected him in the immediate aftermath. It was a tense moment when she was found guilty. There were supporters of Jordan Davis who shouted and said, "I hope she rots in hell." And she disputed it and said she didn't do anything. So it was, as you said, it was one of these charges that maybe wouldn't have been brought in a previous situation, but are being increasingly brought now. The state are bringing
a good roundup of all we're going to talk about. But let's go back first before we come on to Jordan Davis's murder and Wayne Cooney and all these other characters in the story. So let's go back to the Redmond family, and they grew up in large family, grew up in Darndale, Coolock area.
Yeah.
In Ferry Carrig Park was the family home. And the parents were described as alcoholics who were only teenagers when they had the children. And that was came from interviews with Jar Redmond Jr., who has had a colourful life himself, but is now a community worker. So basically, Jar would describe the family, sort of the childhood of the family, having basically, they'd no heating in the house. They would have had no dinner. There was a lot of arguing, a lot of drinking, poor parental structures. He was a good footballer and one of the older members of the family, and he got a place at a YTS scheme at a professional club in Scotland when he was just a young teenager. And I'll just read you a few quotes about how he refers to the childhood in the Redmond family home. He said, "My parents would have had their own issues when they were young. They were 15 or 16 when they had us. The family home would have been cold. They would have carried a lot of pressure on my siblings. That would have carried a lot of pressure on my siblings. No heating. We rarely would have had a hot dinner. We were always asking for help. It was a struggle. There was no radiators, just the man selling the coal if you had money to buy it, but it wasn't there." So now, before Jar, I suppose, had his road to Damascus moment, and before he is in a position that he's been interviewed in national media describing his childhood, the family had this sort of catastrophic moment in 2000 when the father, Jar Redmond, who was then only 34, threw a petrol bomb at another house in the Coolock area. He seemed to have had an altercation on the street, and there was a grandmother and a 2-year-old baby in the house, Adam Lilo. I think there was others in the house. But the 2-year-old Adam died of smoke inhalation as a result of that. And that seems to have been a really catastrophic moment in what was already, I suppose, a catastrophic enough family home.
Yeah, I mean, the Jar Redmond has described those parents were teenagers when they had them, so that's already a pressure situation. But obviously this crime, which was a huge incident at the time, one of these crimes obviously involving a child that gets this national media attention, and it added this pressure to a family situation that was already chaotic and not thriving. He has described Jar Redmond how when his father got a sentence that it broke the family and he had to come home from Scotland where he was...
That was in 2002 and he was tried, but he was found guilty of manslaughter.
Yeah.
And he was jailed for 10 years, and that was for the manslaughter of that toddler.
Yeah.
And during the sentencing, the judge said it was a deliberate act of arson done in revenge for an unprovoked attack by one of the occupants of the house.
Yeah. Obviously, that sentence recognises that the father didn't set out to kill a child.
Yeah.
But however, if you throw a pipe bomb or a firebomb or anything like that through a house, like, you're automatically endangering life. There can be no other way. But it was a huge story. It was one of those things that caused a genuine shockwave across the city at the time. And yeah, that reflects, that impacts again then on the family.
And Jar Redmond's story continues that he, as you say, had to come home. He was one of the older siblings. I think him and his sister had to step in then as the parents, because he would describe how after that his mother kind of moved away.
Yeah. And
they were left, himself and his sister, with the younger siblings, 4 kids under the age of 10, to mind and to provide for. And where he had been on, the right track with his footballing career, he was a brilliant sports guy. He had really a bright future in, I suppose, had he continued, he could have ended up in a Premiership football club at some point. But instead, his life is derailed. He's brought back into the area and into that home to try and parent younger children. And he talks about, at that point, there was just drugs everywhere in the area.
Yeah, I mean, that was the local economy for... as he's described. So there wasn't people, going to college around. There wasn't people earning money in other ways. What he saw in front of him and what his siblings would have seen as well was a drugs economy, an underground black economy where people had a career path laid out in front of them. He describes as being a runner first, then doing odd jobs, earning a bit of money, and you go up the ladder. And that it also provides, because you're mixed in with that world, then you have that protection of the people involved in criminality. You have a bit of status, and I suppose the thing when you hear about it, him describing it. It's the fact that this is for him, coming from where he's coming from and for some of his family, it's absolutely normal. I mean, it's not an abnormal life choice. It's what they're faced with. And, young kids of that age, teenagers, young men in particular, they'll sort of sink or swim in that world. And, he obviously, that's the world he chose, and that's what he had to.
And he said he sort of went from putting the ball in the back of the net to putting food on the table for the younger siblings. Those younger siblings included Rachel Redmond and Robert Redmond, who we're going to come on to talk to. He said he kind of became aggressive.
Yeah.
An enforcer almost in his community. And I think probably because of what had happened, the crime the father had committed, there was still some animosity within the community. So they felt extra pressure maybe on that. But as he sort of became, and he would have been a fit guy.
Yeah.
So that aggression can be used by older drug dealers. They see it as an asset that you have because you're going to be good at scaring people, at collecting drug debts, and about keeping control in the area. He is very, articulate, and he says that you sort of spend your life watching over your shoulder. You become paranoid, edgy. It's no way to live, and you sort of lose everything about yourself. I suppose you lose your moral code, whatever that might have been developed at that stage. You lose your respect for yourself, for other people. And that way he went on. Now, Jar ended up in and out of prison, but it was after his sentence in 2014. He had a son and he decided he was going to go straight, and sport became his thing. He started doing these Ironman challenges, and most recently he set up a kind of community race and fitness hub within that community. He's working with younger people to try and steer them away from crime. So we'll just park him just for the moment, because we go on then to his brother, Robert Roo Redmond, who is now 37. Actually, the same age his dad was when he went to prison for the manslaughter of that baby. But he is serving life for murder now in prison. He lived a very chaotic life. He never found, as of yet, his road to Damascus moment that the brother found. I think he's clocked up nearly 100 convictions at this stage, but he started out quite early.
Yeah, I mean, he had a major conviction when he was 24. He got a 5-year prison sentence after being caught with 43,000 euros worth of heroin and cannabis. That was a major conviction, but he'd already at that point had that reputation, even in the local area, as being a tearaway, the usual path of car robberies and thefts. And then obviously the ending up in the drug dealing. And that case, I suppose, showed, the serious level that he had reached at that stage. The court was told that was in 2011. He'd already received a punishment shooting connected with the drugs business. But when he was caught, he also brazenly told Gardaí he was selling the drugs to make money and that he owed nothing to any other gang.
And that's actually something that had followed him through his career, and in more recent times in particular. He was like a kind of a lone ranger, wasn't he? Or certainly aspired to be that.
Yeah.
He didn't want to take his place in any gang. He wanted to be the top of his own fiefdom.
Totally. I mean, you can see his connections are wide and varied, and he obviously grew up around people that would go on to play significant roles in the Mr. Big criminal organisation. He would have known them, grown up with them, had been friendly with them on and off, but he was totally a lone operator. Ultimately, it is believed he became a kind of gangland figure for hire, an enforcer, a hitman, but also a sort of solo drug dealer who would get drugs and then sell them on. But it also became involved in which is a huge part of the drugs business, which is the sort of debt collecting side of things.
And that seems to have been largely for himself. I mean, a year before that, or sort of a few years before that, 2010, I think, when he was just 21 years of age, because of course that crime was committed in 2011, but he wasn't convicted until he was 24. But at that stage, at 21 years of age, he was caught in an apartment, and there was a tick list, and there was kind of lists of people that owed him money for drugs. And when Redmond served his time in prison, when he came back out, that being owed money seems to have become obsessive with him, and absolutely was his complete reason to be. And you'd wonder, in a way, did that go back to having nothing as a child?
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at it and think that, I suppose, it's not just it's the having nothing, but it's also this sense of people, being better than you or able to lord it over you. And some of the reaction to some of the people who become involved in that sort of chaotic violence, they have that chip on their shoulder for sure. And I mean, obviously he had
in the legitimate economy, some people who have nothing as children will work really, really hard and will be very passionate about securing a home, paying off a mortgage early, that kind of thing. Debt hanging over them doesn't sit well with them. They need the security of a job, a wage, that kind of thing. Whereas he went down a path into drugs, but the money seems to have been such a driving force for him. And almost when he comes out of prison, and of course he hooks up with Bernard Fogarty, he really spirals out of control very quickly. And it's all centred on debts, be they perceived or real.
Yeah, and amazingly, the threats are issued to everybody. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any fear, but he does seem to take all of these things extremely personally. As it's not just the money; it's also the disrespect of not paying it. And as you said, he comes out of prison. He's amassing convictions constantly, but he starts becoming involved in a variety of sort of feuds. He hooks up with Bernard Fogarty. Bernard Fogarty, interestingly, I spoke to somebody who said he wasn't really like that as a child. Bernard Fogarty was a bit of probably a sort of cheery, sort of quirky sort of child, not one of the big hard men. But the two of them worked totally in tandem. And Bernard Fogarty didn't stay like that as he grew up to became a very, very feared, chaotic criminal as well. And they both traded off their reputation of being willing to commit any sorts of violence for even, as you said, big or small amounts of money.
And sort of really it's when his brother Jar has that, he begins his redemption and begins to, focus on sport and on his child and on his community. Robert, his brother, goes further and further out of control. Like, he leaves voice messages from his own phone, threatening people. He says owe him money, and even their mothers. And I suppose that's the beginning of, I'm sure it's happened for years and years, but we start hearing about how the younger members of gangland start focusing their threats on females around those that might owe them money, be it the mothers, the girlfriends. There's all sorts of threats going on. On one occasion now, Redmond actually travelled up to Tyrone and shot through the window of a family home. He claimed that the son of this family owed him $250,000 or something. They had met up in Lanzarote. He wasn't even living at the house. And it was terrifying, and on so many levels. And I remember the one thing, because when you live in the South, you don't consider the politics, I suppose, of any of these towns. But in Tyrone, there was this attitude of, how did a southern drug dealer could come up here and do this? Yeah. And it was that turning point around then when obviously, there wasn't that same control by paramilitaries on certain communities, and they certainly didn't lord it over drug dealers.
No, and they didn't. And the drug dealers became, certainly up in the north, the south, the southern drug dealers, a lot of them from that part of Dublin, became the primary suppliers. But I suppose Roo Redmond, if you look at that case that you're speaking about, he's texting both the son and the mother He's using a regular phone. It's not an encrypted device. He's driving up. He's firing a gun. I mean, all of these things. For on one level, he's going to get caught for some of this stuff eventually, and so but that also adds to the fear of the people being targeted because
there's no control over him whatsoever. No. He's not afraid of the law. He's not afraid of getting caught.
Yeah,
and they're sort of waiting for him to get caught at something so as they can breathe again. This family were on one occasion having a birthday celebration in the back of the house, and the Redmond arrived and shot through, they believed, the front window. And on another occasion, this guy's parents were lying upstairs in bed, and I was in their room, saw the bullet hole in the window. They were lying in bed, and this bullet came in through and whizzed past their heads, literally, and hit the wall. I mean, it was a miracle, really. People say that flippantly, but it really was that nobody was injured in this situation.
And there's sort of the ironies, I suppose, in that, in of his own father, that there's some parallels there. I'll give you an example of another case where Roo Redmond was ultimately convicted for 4.5 years. It was in court in April 2021, where he called to a business owner and told him that he was there to collect 38,000. He said he knew where the man lived and he would go there in a few hours to collect the money. The business owner later received a phone call from Redmond. It told him his gaff would be burnt down with his mott inside it. So it is kind of ironic.
That was after he had been involved and ordered the shooting of Jordan Davis, which happens in May of 2019. The day after, a friend of Davis called Sean Little is shot in a separate feud. But Jordan Davis has just posted a condolence message to Sean Little, calling him a gentleman, when he takes his 4-month-old baby out in a pram, brings him the baby for a walk. He has been, and we know this because his mother has given victim impact statements detailing Jordan Davis's really sort of path into drug dealing and the problem then that they have with their house being shot up and him being threatened and the stress on the family. But he has ordered Redmond has ordered him to pay him 70,000. Actually, there's disputes between the figures. So sometimes 70,000, sometimes 250,000. Again, is this a real debt or is it a perceived debt? It's like as if he comes up with the figures from the top of his head. But Davis is pushing this 4-month-old son in a buggy in a laneway beside Our Lady's Immaculate National School in Darndale on the 22nd of May 2019, and a gunman approaches on a bike.
Yeah.
And shoots him a big 8 times. I mean, again, another miracle occurs when the baby survives and isn't hit by any of the bullets.
Yeah, and again, the threats have come on the phone that they're not particularly disguised. They were read out in court and you can see, he's asking for the money and it's a phone that can be linked to him. Obviously, 70,000 is a huge amount of money for almost anybody in this country. But to just demand somebody produce 70,000 like that,
or you'll kill them.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of not credible. Jordan Davis come from a very, an ordinary working class family. The idea that people can just put their hands on 70 grand just at the flick of a switch is just not possible. So that's certainly how he's operating.
So in January of 2020, 6 months later, or more than 6 months later, the Drogheda feud is at its height. Cian Mulready Woods, the teenager, the 17-year-old, has been kidnapped, dismembered, and his body parts have been left in various locations. Drogheda is on a knife edge. The then chief in the town, Christy Mangan, is wondering, is the rule of law going to survive? He's considering bringing in the army or making a request for the army to be brought in because they simply don't seem to have the resources to fight this gangland situation. And Leo Varadkar, the then Taoiseach, goes up to visit Drogheda and to go to various parts of it and to speak to the police and to offer them reassurance that the state will, give them whatever resources they need. And literally, as this meeting is happening, sort of ironically, as that meeting is happening, a businessman called Barry Wolverson pulls into a scrapyard premises at Madigan's Yard in Swords. And Bernard Fogarty and Robert Roo Redmond are there waiting for him, and they shoot him. They don't kill him. He survives something like 10 months or a year on life support and eventually dies. But it is their last act, really, before their undoing.
Yeah, it's always a murder that the motive is never fully clear. Barry Wolverson wasn't somebody who was notorious in gangland or anything of the sort. However, it's still believed ultimately it was about a collection of money and that they were demanding money off Barry Wolverson. It was a murder that they might have got away with, but ultimately there was partly at least solved as a result of CCTV. Fogarty at this stage and Redmond, they're both coming before the courts on various charges. I think Fogarty is starting to come before the charges on for minor amounts of drugs. So really their criminal career is now effectively coming to an end.
And let's talk about Fogarty, because in the previous year before this murder happens, he has sort of become this online gangland influencer almost.
Yeah.
And he's going a step further than just texting these people and threatening them. He's actually videoing himself.
Yeah, I mean, it's bizarre. I mean, the videos are still there on YouTube. So, like, as we said before, if you make a threat, even if you don't say, I'm going to shoot you in the head, if you go around making threats, like, you are going to be caught and you can be prosecuted. And what the guards would have to do would be to go to court and say, this guy is a dangerous criminal. But so he's going around making these videos, particularly he gets involved in a dispute with the Norton brothers, who are also well-known criminal figures who have been associated with Mr. Big. But Redmond and Fogarty are going around as if none of these guys can touch them on any of the sides of these feuding gangs. He seems to be going in to buy sunglasses a lot, and then he's been talking about his holidays, and then he'll come out with, the threat is made to the Nortons. He says, you have one more day to come out and fight me like a fucking man. One more day. If you don't come out and start fighting, and other people are going to start falling victim, you fucking rat. You fucking come out and fucking fight. And then he plays, I think he has the song Murder on My Mind that he plays.
The threats they're making, though, are real, because Fogarty, some months previous to the shooting of Barry Wolverson, was arrested and questioned about the shooting of another man called Mark Ivers in Donamead. And then obviously Redmond has been mixed up and believed to have ordered the murder of Jordan Davis. So you're getting a phone call or you're getting called out on social media by these guys, and you would be really fearful.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was, in some ways the videos were bizarre, but there was, and he's making jokes and all of that, but the underlying fact is these people had access to very high-powered weapons. They came before the courts in connection with the seizure of a submachine gun. They were very, very notorious and very much capable of carrying out their threats.
So by 2023, both Redmond and Fogarty are off the streets. They're in prison and they're found guilty of the murder of Barry Wolverson. But a year later, and just in May of 2024, Robert Redmond also pleads guilty to conspiring with others to murder Jordan Davis. The previous murder we spoke about, where he was wheeling his baby in a buggy. And at that point, Justice Paul McDermott said that Redmond had been deeply involved in what he, quote, cold-blooded and well-planned killing of a man who was shot down in front of his infant son. And it's this murder then that implicates Robert Redmond's sister, Rachel, and brings her into the courts, because Rachel Redmond was, at the time of the Jordan Davis murder in May 2019, in a relationship with the aforementioned Wayne Cooney.
Yeah.
Now, Cooney has a bit of background.
Yeah, Cooney has a bit of background. I mean, he wasn't from the areas, from the Tala area originally. He hadn't been involved in those sort of feuds that was going on. So straight away, Roo Redmond became a suspect because of that connection. Cooney was convicted ultimately of the murder, and he was described by the prosecution as acting like a shark patrolling the ocean looking for its prey. And he was seen on this distinctive orange bicycle. He'd looked out for him. He sort of stalked him over a 3-day period before carrying out the murder.
So that was 22 that Cooney is convicted of murder. So he's serving life in prison.
So at all points during that trial, the fact he was going out with Roo Redmond's sister, and he had no particular connection with Jordan Davis and Jordan Davis's mother, that's obviously ultimately would come to court and describe the texts. So Roo Redmond is 100%. The guards believe he has, played as a key role in the murder of Jordan Davis. He there is no like that.
And he knows Wayne Cooney through his sister,
he knows,
Redmond,
yeah,
who I think is 3 years younger than him.
Yeah.
Than Roo Redmond. I mean, Rachel is 3 years younger than her brother.
Yes. So ultimately, Wayne Cooney is found guilty of murder. Roo Redmond pleads guilty to a lesser charge, but involvement in the murder. In the meantime, he's been convicted of, obviously, Barry Wolverson's murder, and he's also been convicted of very serious weapons charges to do with that submachine gun. So he's facing prison. There's very few people who are serving life or serving sentences for 2 gangland murders. I mean, it's uncommon. And it looks like it's case solved. But ultimately, Rachel Redmond gets charged as well. So when it came to court, as I said, the facts of the case weren't in dispute. She picked him up in the aftermath, and there was another woman in the car who also gave evidence about Wayne Cooney being picked up. It was all on CCTV. There was footage of the car being turned around and Wayne Cooney getting in. There was evidence given about, Wayne Cooney speaking about the murder of Jordan Davis. Now, the evidence wasn't given that he said, I'm after doing it or anything, but there was obviously somebody had been shot within seconds in those cases, or within minutes at least. There's a huge police presence at the scene. I mean, it would rarely take, if after a shooting, you have that maybe 5 minutes, you'd get police at the scene. So that's all going on. Obviously, the reason that somebody would use a bike is in those type of housing estates that you can get in and out pretty quickly. A lot of these places have roads boarded off to stop traffic, using it as a thoroughfare, and a bike allows you to do that. I think Alan Ryan as well was shot somewhere using a bike as well. So he's obviously can get out of the scene to an extent. He doesn't have to rob a car or anything like that. But getting away from the scene ultimately, as the police start to sort of cordon off the area. And
you tried to drive through some of those areas.
Oh, like I did. And you can see why somebody would use a bike because every now and again you have these bollards that
weren't designed for, with gangland hits in mind, were they, like by the planners? No,
because you have green areas and those bollards keep popping up.
Yeah. It doesn't even completely lost. It's like being in a maze.
So you can see why a bike could be used, and it has been used in the past. But then, obviously, that's the first bit to get away. Then you have to get totally away from the scene. Traditionally, obviously, gangland murders involved the stealing of 2 cars, didn't they? They'd use one car to carry out the murder, drive to somewhere close, burn out that car, and then take a second car to get off the scene, because obviously in the initial stage of investigation there'd be a lookout for this car will be put out. So that's been the traditional way to set it on fire, to get rid of the evidence. So Rachel Redmond is obviously, as they go through the CCTV, as they follow the path of the killer as best they can, it takes actually a really, really long time, because they'll have to go to individual houses. If you're in an estate like that, they have to get a warrant, they have to seize it from the householder, and the householder can be asked to hand it over, but a lot of people wouldn't without a warrant. And then they have to place it all together. And obviously at some point along the way, the guards see Wayne Cooney being picked up, and the charges are brought.
Now, she said in court that she was in love with Cooney, hadn't seen any bad in him, and didn't believe that he would have been capable of that. But in his closing speech, Saoirse O'Donoghue, senior counsel, said that her testimony was absolutely risible. And he said the accused is saying, I didn't know. If you said that to a horse, you would get a kick.
Yeah.
Sometimes funny things are said.
They are.
Courtrooms as kind of analogies, but
to make a point.
He's basically saying that, it's ridiculous that she should suggest that she didn't think Cooney was capable of that, or, that her evidence was not, truthful. But nonetheless, I suppose coming out of all that, you have a situation where you have Rachel Redmond now awaiting sentencing for her conviction in relation to the Jordan Davis murder. It reminds me somewhat, although it was far more serious for Regina Keogh, when Johnny Keogh, the INLA member, had taken on the job to kill Gareth Hutch from the Kinahans, and his sister was living in the Avondale House apartment complex where Gareth Hutch was living, and her apartment had a view over a car park where he was expected to go and drive his car out the next morning, where he was ultimately shot dead. And she was convicted of murder and is serving a life term in prison. When you're close to somebody who's involved in crime of that level, you are far more likely to be asked to do something or to be drawn into it. End of.
Yeah, of course. And
this is your brother. This is, somebody you probably trust and rely on. In the case of Rachel Redmond, there's no suggestion that Roo Redmond asked her to do any of this, but she's close to the people that she's close, obviously, to Wayne Cooney, in a relationship with them, close to her brother and his activities. You've got a much larger percentage chance of getting caught up in something than an individual with no connections at all.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to obviously the old case of joint enterprise, as it's called, where a murder has to be, a number of people can be involved in committing a murder, even if they're not pulling the trigger. The case of Regina Keogh, she was convicted ultimately because the court heard that she knew what was going to go on, that there was guys there, her brother and others, waiting in her apartment with guns, that she had to, that the murder couldn't have been carried out basically with her help. Now, obviously, Rachel Redmond hasn't been convicted of murder. She's been convicted of impeding a murder investigation. But again, the jury have decided that she's culpable and that she played a role in helping somebody get away from a murder scene, and that despite her claims, it wasn't credible that she didn't know what she was doing at the time when she did it.
So, and here we are in 2025, and that's where two members of the Redmond family, unfortunately, are behind bars on those convictions. Jar Redmond, most recently, and just into last year, set up this running club. He's in the media for all the right reasons and is an inspiration to others. They all come out of that same chaotic home. People talk about nature or nurture. It has to be a bit of both. And also, I would think you need to be a really strong character to come out of all of that unscathed in some way.
Yeah, look, we're all, I suppose, you don't come out unscathed, maybe all right, but to be able to make a definitive turn in your life, that takes incredible strength of character, I suppose. And also
to point out, there's other, siblings from the Redmond family who have nothing to do with criminality, but...
yeah, I mean, it just shows you
and
that...
Jar Redmond has never spoken about his brother or sister. He has never actually spoken about... He's spoken in general about the family and about his upbringing, but he's never spoken directly about them.
No, he hasn't, and you can understand why. I mean, he's going to have a loyalty to his family no matter what, and that's totally understandable. I suppose you have to look at it, look back and see the chaotic circumstances of that family that were when the father was convicted. Obviously, he was taken away from his children at that stage. And you have to look and think, did the state do enough for that family? I mean, that's not to say that to excuse any crime that's occurred in the aftermath. And of course, the victims of Roo Redmond will have a perspective that has to be honoured as well. But you have to look back and see that a family have been left in a really, really difficult circumstance. Do people in those situations, can the state not do more for them to support them in a positive way? Certainly, I know in a lot of those sort of circumstances, people then start to believe the state is the enemy and that social services are only there to hurt the family further or break up families. And, and some of that is not without justification. But you have to look back and say, for whatever Roo Redmond has to pay for his crimes, the state also really, you think the state has a case to answer for as well, that enough wasn't done.
Mm. Okay, Niall, thank you very much.
Thanks, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.